Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Matt Kozlowski. I'm responsible for services and cybersecurity over at the Winslow Technology Group. This morning, I am joined by Russ Rodrigue, the president of Haylius Consulting, and his managing partner, Joe Kennedy, also at Haylius Consulting. We are going to talk about maximizing IT culture, specifically building an effective cyber insurance strategy. Little overview of the agenda today and what we're going to talk about. So the top of the hour now, we're just going to do a brief overview of WTG. I'll give you a little bit of a little information about us, what we do, and then I'll introduce Russ and Joe and Haylius, and they can talk with you a bit about building an effective cyber insurance plan, different best practices, and even some of their own experience in the private or commercial sector in terms of responding to incidents. At the end, we'll have a little bit of time for QA. Sometimes we end up going over and have to capture questions at the end, but hopefully we'll get there. And of course, last but certainly not least, one lucky attendee is eligible to win a Bonfire 2.0 solo stove for attending the webinar live. A little bit about the Winslow Technology Group. We really have a passion for all things technology and all things like people and organizations, really. So we combine our expertise. Literally have hundreds of years of on-staff expertise. 4 CISSPs, 2 cloud version of the CISP. I'm missing the name of that, and a whole other slew of certifications and so on and so forth. We've worked through a significant number of cybersecurity incidents, unfortunately on the back end, but also helped prevent. I'd like to think anyway, a lot of cybersecurity incidents on the front end with different consulting services and solutions we offer. This also includes having excellent partnerships. So we believe in a better together story, and that certainly is not more true than with Russ and Joe today over at Haylius. So I'm excited to bring them on board. A little bit about our coverage. So we are headquartered right outside of Boston in Waltham, Massachusetts. We have offices in New York, Charlotte, and Washington, D.C. We like to say we're from the desktop to the data center to the cloud. So we have end user compute, networking, and cloud solutions. And certainly what we're going to talk about today is our professional services offerings, specifically cybersecurity, and in this case, cybersecurity and cyber insurance prep, I'll say. Part of our methodology is not just identifying game-changing technologies, but also game-changing partners. We have an extensive network of partnerships that we've really developed and curated. And as I said, Joe and Russ are fantastic partners of ours. We really love working with the Haylius folks over there, and I'm happy to introduce them in just a moment. This slide is soon to be outdated, and that's okay because we've been using it for a number of years now. So this is, as many people know, the NIST CSF 1.0 or 1.1 framework of your friendly identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. So the Winslow Technology Group and Haylius actually provides a variety of consulting services and products or service products that help all organizations, all shapes and sizes, achieve a fairly comprehensive and substantial cybersecurity posture to defend, detect, and of course, incidents happen, respond and recover from an incident. So I will transition this over now to Joe and Russ. A little bit about Haylius here. We have a long-standing partnership and friendship, honestly, with both Joe and Russ. Fantastic people. Very intelligent, and we've worked extensively with Joe and Russ in the past. Looking very much forward to speaking with them today and having them share a bit more about themselves, Haylius, and certainly the cyber insurance world. So, Joe and Russ, would you like to take it from here?
Yes, thanks, Matt. Appreciate that. Looking forward to talking with folks today, really talking about how do you build an effective cybersecurity insurance strategy. Oftentimes it feels like there's a lot of unknowns there. People want to make sure that they get the right coverage and understand what their risks are. Before we get to that, just quickly, we understand that we're now into 2024. In fact, already a month through the year, hard to believe. And as we look at the threat landscape, what are those attack vectors that the bad guys are out there doing? This year, we all know it's an election year. definitely have seen and heard a lot about that already. Well, a lot of the threats that we're seeing are coming through artificial intelligence. And with artificial intelligence, the use of deepfakes, both audio and video, imaging, the artificial intelligence is used to change malware on the fly and respond in different ways, getting misinformation out there, all major concerns in the 2024 election year. And then the supply chain is another concern where we see third-party vendors, ones that we're using. Are we really validating them, making sure that they have a robust cybersecurity plan and they are building into their products and services a cybersecurity solution? And then on the far right, you'll notice, I'll just highlight the skill shortage. Most small to medium-sized enterprises, unfortunately, are seeing really a pinch in having in-house technicians or specialists that are focused on security. Many are having to wear more than one hat. And we'll talk a little bit about that here in a minute. Russ, I will let you introduce this topic.
Yes, thank you, Joe. And Matt and the Winslow team, we appreciate being here. There's no shortage of cybersecurity trend data points out there. We're just going to cover a few quick ones here. Get your eyes attention to the $2.4 million. That's the cost of an average breach. They're hovering around that number right now. But interestingly enough, insurance is only covering about 40% of those costs. And so it just speaks volumes into why the right programs and the right policies and the right procedures are so required to make sure that you're covering your organization. We're seeing a lot of drops in trends that are related to cyber insurance policies being reduced. And this particular stat shows about 24% drop since 2022. That's an interesting statistic. There's a lot of meat on that bone that we're going to cover here throughout this presentation as to why. Overall, about 21% of smaller organizations, which statistically are around 250 employees, versus 85% of large organizations, 1,000 or more, actually carry cyber insurance. And again, we will cover a few points and articulate why that is, we believe that to be the case. AIG is reporting that 40% rise in cyber premiums, adding obtaining tighter terms and conditions to address increasing cybersecurity trends. So there's several big organizations, Lloyd's is another one that is starting to see this momentum of higher increased premiums, but then the tighter conditioning for getting insurance. And finally, 41% of organizations that suffered a material incident in the past 12 months say it was caused by a third party. And we're going to get into that in a bit more details in a moment.
Thanks, Russ. So as we see here on the graphs and the images here on the screen, you'll notice, what are you most concerned about in regards to generative AI's impact on cyber? So these were questions that were asked of organizations all across the globe. The number one issue that they saw was, as a concern, was artificial intelligence, specifically related to phishing campaigns and malware development, and again, deepfakes, which are becoming more and more prevalent. Another question that was posed to large and small organizations: does your organization have the skills that are needed to respond and recover from cyber attacks? And as you'll notice, the black numbers here represent small revenue organizations, while larger revenue organizations in the hundreds of millions are the light blue numbers. So you're seeing, right, a significant gap decrease in the number of folks that are internal or in-house that are proficient in managing the security needs of the business. And then lastly here, you notice on the far right, the demand for cyber insurance continues to grow. We're seeing more and more organizations that are needing cyber insurance or needing to increase their coverage, realizing the coverage that they had previously really wasn't adequate enough to be able to carry the risk that they have as an organization. So as we look at insurance carriers, gone are the days where insurance carriers ask you 3 or 4 questions and then say, sure, here's your premium and here's your coverage. Those days are gone. Now they're oftentimes giving you an exhaustive, extensive application that you're needing to fill out. Oftentimes the CIO can't just fill it out by himself. There's other people that need to be involved, and more technical people understanding what the questions are asking. So insurance carriers are getting smarter. They want to understand the overall risk to the organization that you may pose to them before they provide coverage. And so as we look at what are the things that insurance carriers want to see, and we've put together a number of things here that we think that we see, and we think that you'll find valuable information for you. First of all, we know that good cybersecurity hygiene, if you're looking at the health of the security within your organization, begins and really ends with policies and procedures. Do you have good written plans? Do you have it documented what your procedures are in an offboarding or onboarding, bringing on new employees? Do you have an IR plan? Is it robust enough to be able to handle the different types of incidents that could potentially occur within your environment and your organization? And then what about risk assessments and vulnerability scans? It's not enough to say that, yes, we had one done before. Now they're looking for a regular cadence, and it's happening either on a yearly or a biannual periodical occurrence. And then vulnerability scanning, again, not enough to say, yes, we do that. I think we have a tool. Is it automated? Are you looking at it? What's your patch process? And again, security controls. Most of us think of cybersecurity programs as just being the technical controls that we put in place. And while that is true, we need to protect our data with encryption and with multi-factor authentication. Those things are important, but it's not enough to just have technical controls. We need to train our employees. Are we doing enough with our employees, not just giving them a 10-minute training or a 20-minute training once a year? Are we doing ongoing training? Meaning, are we doing phishing simulations, some sort of education along the way, but potentially as much as monthly? And then what about specific roles within the organization, whether it's executives that may have a higher risk of some sort of phishing threat or social engineering campaign? Or what about HR or finance? Are there proper controls and training in place for them so they can understand and identify either potential scams or frauds that may be occurring within the organization? Insurance carriers want to see this. And then we look at, again, a number of things that carriers are getting smarter at, and we see how are you handling the controls within the organization to provide access to information, right? Least privilege, only provide access to information that the employees need to have access to. It's not a give everyone everything that they might need. And then are you doing encryption at rest? Are you providing encryption in transit, in use? They want end-to-end encryption solutions in place. Again, managing patches and some sort of regular cadence. You might have a patch Tuesday. How often and how quickly do you deploy patches that are provided by not just the Microsofts of the world, but what about your infrastructure and other IoT devices that we might not quickly think about? Then we look at security measures, whether they're firewalls and intrusion detection devices. Those things need to be there, and they need to be logging and centralized logging, making sure that we're reviewing those. And then are you having some sort of audit? Do you provide some way to show that you have controls in place and either a third party is assessing those or you have an audit team that is showing proof that you are doing what you say you're doing? Some more things here that insurance carriers want to look at is, again, backups. They've been around forever. They're only important when you need them, but they do want to look at your backup procedures. Do you have defined recovery time objectives and recovery point objectives? Have you tested your backups? Do they work? Oftentimes we don't test them unless we need to get to a backup. So what sort of cadence are you putting into your backup plan and testing those? What about the supply chain? Again, Russ mentioned over 40% of people who have had some sort of incident, those have occurred through the third parties that they use, either through products and services or hardware that they're buying. And because of that, what type of contract do you have with those vendors? Making sure that there are cybersecurity clauses and understanding who owns what risk is critical. Again, mentioning legal and regulatory compliance. Matt mentioned the NIST cybersecurity framework and how that's updating to 2.0. Well, as you align with best practices, you may be required to comply with PCI or maybe with HIPAA or high trust if you're in healthcare. There's a number of compliance concerns that insurance carriers will want to look at and make sure that you're following. And then much like car insurance, if you've had speeding tickets or have had a history of having car accidents, your premiums will go up. They do want to look at your history. And so you'll have to answer questions around what type of coverage and potential claims you've filed before. And then financial stability, how financially solvent is the organization, if they're doing well, bringing in revenue, and are able to handle some sort of event should it occur. All right, moving into now a topic that quickly I want to talk about. What are some mistakes that we see really across different industries when folks are applying for cyber insurance? One, we want to make sure we understand that oftentimes we don't accurately assess the organization's specific cyber risk. Okay? Sometimes we underestimate what our risk is, and we think, well, we're a small, medium-sized business. There's really not much here that bad guys would want. And unfortunately, because of that, we don't get the right coverage. And then when there is some sort of incident and we need to file a claim, we really don't have the coverage that we need. When you're filling out the application, make sure you are transparent with the insurers. If you do not have MFA deployed yet, it's okay to say, we do not have it deployed yet. We are deploying it soon and having some sort of plan of action. Now, again, most carriers are requiring that you have MFA in place. So that may be a refusal right along on the application process initially. So they can deny claims if you have provided false information. So you may want to make sure that you don't do that. Again, making sure that with industry regulations that you're compliant with them, and having an audit or an assessment by a third party done is a great way to show that you are compliant with any type of regulation. Do not make the mistake of forgetting to implement some sort of requirement that is PCI required or that is SOX compliant. Another mistake we often see is providing incomplete information or maybe documentation to them. If they say, hey, show us your written information security policy, and you give it to them, but it hasn't been updated in years, right? They want to see not only you have a plan, but that you're updating it on a regular cadence. That could be quarterly, that could be yearly, but as long as you have a routine time that you look at it and update it, they're going to be satisfied with that. Another mistake we see is not having an updated or even having an incident response plan altogether. It's not a matter of if, but when you'll have some sort of incident. So being prepared for that, they want to know that you can handle an incident. And again, you got to have a plan, but you got to test the plan. Are you doing some sort of tabletop exercise? Are you doing a walkthrough or a simulated event so that you can determine, right, what you need to do and be prepared in the event of an attack of some sort of breach? Another mistake we see, again mentioned because it is a major concern, is a lot of third parties, vendors, are providing solutions to organizations and they are concerned with revenue. They're not necessarily concerned with the security of their product. So make sure you understand what risk you have with the organization as it relates to third parties or service providers that you work with, because there are more and more vulnerabilities being introduced into your environment from third parties. Don't assume that all incidents are covered. We see this oftentimes. There will be exclusions, and Russ will talk more about this in a minute, but understand that there could be exclusions at time of war, a terrorist attack, right? That could be seen as an exclusion, and they may not cover that ransomware attack because it was, they determined that it was launched by the Chinese military. So be aware of your exclusions. If you do not update or test your software that you have, they may very well deny a claim. So make sure you understand that you're scanning your environments, you understand your vulnerabilities, and that you're keeping those systems and applications patched on a regular basis. The number one cause of a breach within your environment is because you do not have systems patched. We need to understand that cybersecurity is not just a technical issue for IT. In fact, it's a business issue, and the entire organization needs to understand that. And conversely, IT needs to understand they can't build a cyber plan without talking to the operations folks within the business. So make sure we align the cyber program and the initiatives and the roadmap with the strategic plan of the organization. And you have to do so by talking with the leaders of the organization. Otherwise, there could be this disconnect, and you may be spending money in places where the organization does not need to. And then the last mistake I'll talk about here briefly is not knowing what limits or coverage you need. Meaning, are you covering just enough what you need for risk? So understand what risk you have and then how much coverage you need to mitigate that risk. So you want your premium to be as low as possible. You may want the deductible to be higher. And so understand where your costs are related to what business impact may have to the organization as it relates to the most important critical IT systems or applications that you use. All right, and with that, I'm going to pass it off to Russ.
Thank you, Joe. Joe did a great job covering off like some of the risks and the mistakes and the consequences associated. Now I'm going to tee you up a little bit on what to be ready for when you start your application process or your renewal process. I think it's really important to understand you need to be informed as the customer on questions you should be asking the carriers. You know, you need to understand the terms and the conditions of the event and the coverages. Some of the specific coverages we should be looking at are related to what types of cyber incidents are covered by the policy. Is it a ransomware, BEC, or data exfiltration? Sometimes it's a state actor compromise. You need to be ready for that. Are there any exclusions that you need to be aware of that the insurance carriers will not cover? Standard ones, state actor compromises. Those are becoming more and more prevalent for not being covered. We also want to talk about coverage limits and deductibles. What are the coverages limits that are for different types of incidents? Often carriers set up limits per incident. Deductibles, like auto insurance, must be paid off first, off the top, if you will, by the company before the carrier pays any additional amount. So you need to understand your deductibles. Then first party and third party coverages. What we're talking about here is the first party, which is you, the company, are accountable for things like data breach response and business interruption communications and executive discussions. The policy itself, does the policy, provide liability coverage for third-party claims? As oftentimes the third parties, as we mentioned twice now, have a contributory part to data breaches that we've seen statistically. So make sure you're understanding your third-party coverage. Now getting into incident response. So incident response is really about, does the policy include coverage for which specific types of incidents or services that are going to be applied? Aligning these services, which could be forensics, could be legal, could be a third party that you're doing global communications with, crisis management. These are all services that require some pre-alignment, and it's best to have that done now as you're getting into the contract, not trying to figure it out on the fly. These legal assistance providers will be very attuned to what's going on. They can help prevent some issues with regulatory investigations or lawsuits from clients. It's great to have them in play and ready before an incident occurs. So let's say incident ransomware coverage. Does the policy cover ransom attacks, including ransom payments and recovery costs? And it's really important to understand the difference. So obviously, we're all familiar with ransom attacks. They compromise your system. However they get in, they lock your data and they hold it ransom. Oftentimes, ransom payments are often paid with Bitcoin, and you need a Bitcoin wallet, which is a third-party provider, for example. And there's often fees incurred with that. Some of those fees are not covered by the carriers. They're responsibility of the company as part of the deductibles. So it's really important to understand in the ransom coverage, what does it entail? There are sublimits and aggregation limits to be considered. So sublimits are really a limitation of liability, which to cover a specific type of loss. It places a maximum on the amount that can be paid out from a specific loss to the policyholder. So those sublimits are really important to understand, as are aggregates, right, or aggregation amounts. So sometimes that's multiple claims in a certain period of time. Or the lifetime of the agreement is so many per year, but it is really important to understand where these aggregation numbers lie in the policies you'll be signing. Looking at things retroactively, retroactive dates or waiting periods. A lot of times the clients, carriers, excuse me, are putting in retroactive dates. They're doing that because companies are getting breached, get insurance, and then file a claim. Their insurance carriers are getting a lot smarter about this stuff. So they're instituting waiting periods before coverage becomes effective. I think that's their validation point, just to make sure that the incident hasn't already occurred. So really keep keen eyes to those waiting periods when the insurance kicks in. Security requirements. These are specific cybersecurity measures that the organization must have in place to qualify for coverage. Now, the carriers are getting really particular about some of the programs that you have in place. How does that carrier assess your organization's security practices? Are they coming in and doing an audit? Are they asking for artifacts? Are they going to place a warm body, so to speak, in the organization to come in and then kind of assess? So it's really important that when you look at security requirements, that everything Joe talked about a moment ago, you have in place. Notifications. So what are the notification requirements for the event when a cyber event occurs? There are certain timings that have to go in place. So how soon must the organization report the incident to the carrier? Clearly, you've got some forensics to do, some analysis to do. You got to gauge whether or not it even is an incident, and deciding as a team. It's not just IT. A lot of times it's the executives and the business partners and third parties who have to make a determination of when to notify. So, but understanding what the protocols are and the requirements of the carrier are really important. Once you've made, once you've had an incident and you file a claim, there's a process that you need to be aware of. Is it a online form you start with first? Do you make a phone call to your insurance broker? Do you go directly to the insurance carrier? It's really important to understand how quickly the organization expects a response from the insurer after filing a claim, because you're going to want to get in immediately and start the remediation process. And a lot of times you have contractual agreements with your clients on how quickly you have to respond. So it's a big timing event that you have to be aware of here. So claim process is very important to understand. There are pre-approvals required for services. A lot of these services, like forensics investigators, which are deeply important to getting under the root cause of where the problem lies or what the cyber event is really all about, they're not necessarily immediately covered. So you have to make sure that using a particular forensics investigator or a particular law firm that the insurance carrier works with, almost consider it like your medical space, you're in and out of network doctors, the same concept. They like working, the carriers like working with partners. And so you may need a pre-approval from the insurance carrier. So how does that understanding how that pre-approval process really works? And then loss mitigation. So loss mitigation, how does the policy provide assistance for loss mitigation and those recovery efforts? And what are the services or resources available to help minimize the impact? This happens to be a really important first step. If you plan this up in advance at the contract period, when you're gaining and gathering insurance requirements and applying and getting issued insurance, have all this information documented early and in advance, because you will, in the throes of an incident, you don't want to have to be working out what some of these recovery efforts might mean. And from a policy renewal perspective, there's many organizations do have insurance today, and many of them are renewing and finding it to be a much more complicated process. To Joe's point of the intro, it's not just a 15-question questionnaire anymore. Premiums change based on how you've used your insurance over the course of the term. And so understanding what the factors might be that lead up to any potential premium increases. And unfortunately, some of these increases are just naturally and organically happening, as you can see in the earlier data point slide that we showed, the massive growth in premium increases. But Are there any changes to the policy terms at the renewal? That's an important question to get right up front. And then vendors and third-party or service provider coverage. Does the policy cover incidents that arise from the actions of a third party or a service provider? We saw statistically, I think it was 41% of incidents are showing that some form of accountability or culpability is related to a third party. How does the policy address third-party liability? So understanding what the carrier's insurance terms are as it relates to third parties will make for a lot less pain down the road trying to sort out the who is responsible. And then final point here, security audits and assessments. Is the organization subject to a security audit, cybersecurity audit by the insurance carrier? Many of them are starting to do this with regular cadence. How does the insurer evaluate the organization's cybersecurity practices over time? Do you build a relationship with them? Do you do tabletop exercises with them? They provide resources through their pre-approval third-party partners. So it's really important as you look at the assessments they're going to do against your organization for the renewals, typically, it's important to understand that. But to kind of close out this section, I think it's important to understand while trends are showing that it's harder to get insurance, the carriers are adding clauses and restrictions on what is covered. Costs are going up, but cyber events also continue to increase. Companies are shifting funds to some degree away from cyber insurance itself and placing more emphasis on building better cyber programs, focusing on training, defense tools, utilizing more consulting organizations to help augment or assess or remediate risks. So this whole program, this whole event, today's webinar, is really to help educate you all on that process and the lessons learned and the questions to ask. And we're excited to be part of this with the Winslow Technology Group. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Matt.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Like this was super informative, and I'll tell you, one of the, well, actually two of the recent cyber incidents that I've worked through here at WTG, like the client did depend on cyber insurance, and I'll tell you, the response actually was very constructive. Not gonna name any preferred vendors, I guess, on the, or cyber insurers or carriers, I should say, but I would say the experience was fairly positive. So, you know, while there's like speculation, and curious, Joe and Russ, what you guys think of this, but well, there's speculation that this industry could collapse over time. I actually see it morphing into much more of a partnership between organizations and businesses in terms of the you know, carrier providing coverage with the appropriate considerations, and that means like the client would need to have like the right, you know, solutions in place to defend against a cyber attack and mitigate or hopefully reduce the impact of one.
Yeah, Matt, I couldn't agree more.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Couldn't agree more, Matt, with that comment you just made. We're seeing that with our clients that are looking to either renew or get new insurance, that the more procedural, the more process and systems, and they want to audit, they want to assess, but we're seeing a faster track to policy approvals, and we're also seeing you know, maybe there's still going to be an increase in rates, but maybe it's not as much, you know, significant of an increase because you've put these programs in play and systems in place. So
Right.
we're definitely seeing that, and I do agree it's going to be a convergence of partnership down the road.
Yeah, I feel like that's the way this just has to work, and yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'll tell you too, something interesting that I've seen in some of the language on policies, which is interesting too, and this could be something for folks to look at, is they're called like betterment clauses. So it seems like not only are cyber insurers, of course, willing to you know, respond and actually provide valuable services during an incident, but it seems like some of them are also offering betterment services, and of course that also would seem to be in the better interest of the cyber insurer as to prevent repeat attacks and so on and so forth. Is that something like you guys have seen, or does having a betterment clause like resonate with you in terms of perhaps how organizations could, you know, better themselves and perhaps leverage a cyber insurer post attack to help with that?
Yeah, Matt,
Joe,
absolutely.
Go ahead, Joe.
Sure. Absolutely. You know, transparency breeds trust, and It's not enough to just have a contractual relationship. If you're working with your insurance carriers to understand, they can understand really what your risks are. You're transparent with them on the controls you have in place. And again, as we mentioned, what your plan of action is to improve your environment. That goes a long ways in helping to secure the coverage, the appropriate coverage that you need.
I think we're actually up on time. So with that, actually, if anyone, we do have a couple questions in the chat here. What we'll do is, because we're kind of up against time here, we'll follow up with folks after the webinar and make sure we answer any questions that folks have. So I'd just like to say, thank you very much to our attendees. We really appreciate hanging with us and learning a little bit more, not only about cyber insurance, but getting to meet Russ and Joe, some of our great partners over at Haylius Consulting. Russ and Joe, any parting words, and then we can release the people for the day, as they say.
Yeah, thank you
I'm just
very much. Oops, sorry, Joe. Thank you very much for the opportunity. It's a great partnership. We've known Winslow Technology Group for a long time. We're a service provider. We work hand in glove with Winslow. If you do have any questions, please, never hesitate to reach out. We'll work through the sales teams. Reach us direct if there's that opportunity. We'll find partnership ways to get together. But we're here for you. We want, and our mantra is delighted, wise counsel and delighted clients. And working with Winslow, we feel like they share the same theme. So thanks for the opportunity.
Awesome. Yeah, you
absolutely.
guys got it. Also, I'll throw out another perhaps shameless plug and then wrap it up with that. For folks that have any needs for developing an incident response plan, developing a business continuity plan, developing a disaster recovery plan, or doing tabletop exercises for a plan you already have, please contact Winslow, and we can put you in touch with Haylius. They do a really awesome job with that too. So with that, I will say thank you very much. I hope everyone has a really great day and stay secure. All right. Bye-bye.